to be perfect is boring. What is perfect? Who says something is perfect? Define perfection. If I am perfect, I am not going to be laughed, I'm not going to be judged, I'm not going to be criticised. Just LAR it. So LAR is an acronym and it stands for learn, act, review. It's so much easier to be authentic, to not put energy into walking around with this mask, this perfect version of whoever you're meant to be. To just be able to be yourself is far easier. Hi, welcome to the Optimizing Your Brilliance podcast, where we get to the source of what makes people brilliant and explore how to eradicate the barriers that stop you from shining. By shining, I mean being at your absolute best in both work and life. You'll hear from business and thought leaders who bear all and share their insider secrets, along with my episodes focused on optimizing your performance, productivity, success, and well-being. My name is Estelle Reed, founder of Be, executive coach, speaker, and best-selling author of Inner Brilliance, Outer Shine, 10 Antidotes to Imposter Syndrome, Workaholism, and Stress. So, if you're ready to take your work life to the next level, let's begin. So, welcome to the Be Perfect episode. It's such an interesting topic, and being perfect is one of the imposter syndrome types. So when we're not perfect, we feel like a failure, a fraud, that something wrong. We have a phrase in our house that to be perfect is boring. And also, what is perfection? So I want you to imagine the scene. You've been working really hard on a project. You've managed to get lots of green ticks in your project management software. And then you see a red cross, which represents the fact that you've missed something or there's an error or a mistake. So then you spend loads of time reviewing, reviewing sections that had already even been signed off, just to make sure that there aren't mistakes elsewhere, because that self-doubt kicks in. And you think, if that's wrong, then other areas must be wrong. And the problem with that is, when do we ever get to a point of perfection? And I remember years ago working with a really successful guy. In his mind, he wasn't a success. But this is the imposter syndrome thing, where there's a disconnect between outside results and inner thoughts. And we were working on perfectionism. It was before the days of havening or using EFT, getting rid of cheat and change, getting rid of that stuff. And he said it's like polishing a never-ending ball that you just never get to the end of, because by the time you've polished one side, you need to polish the other side, and that you never get an article that's perfect. And if you think about it, what is perfect? Who says something is perfect? Define perfection. And that's one of the things I'm going to be doing in this episode, is getting you to think about what perfection is, where it comes from, and how we move away from it. So the core fear when it comes to being perfect is that we're concerned about being exposed as being imperfect, which means, so there's this connection between imperfection. So when we're imperfect, we are unworthy. And there's also a strong connection between mistakes as well. So mistakes and failing is often connected with this particular pattern. And in the background, there's also this fear of criticism. So therefore driving us to not take risks. So if I don't take risks, I won't make mistakes and I can't be criticised. On previous episodes, I've spoken about the connections with the DISC profile, so personality profile. So the D stands for dominance, influence, steadiness, and compliance. And under high C, or compliance, there is a high need for perfection under that profile as well. And if you're a high C and you're trying to avoid making mistakes and ensuring that everything is perfect, then this episode is for you. So, where does it come from? Often it comes from having had a critical parent or critical beings around us when we're growing up. And this model, you'll have heard me talk about the drowning man. So it's a man, he's in water, he's got a series of balloons that he's holding onto the string that are keeping his head above water. And contained within each one of these balloons is a pattern of behavior. And the pattern we're focused on today is being perfect. And so cutting the string, so just deciding to not be perfect, seems too risky because the fear is that we'll go under. So today, my aim is to give you some strategies so that it's easier to gradually let go of that string or to erase the need for the string altogether. So back to the origins. So I spoke about it can come from having a critical parent. So, it might be a parent was critical over your appearance, for example. I know back in the 80s, what did they used to do? They used to spit on a handkerchief and wipe your face. Thank God for wet wipes, hey? So it might be to do with a flawless appearance or flawless behavior, giving that pristine outer, we are a perfect family type of experience. Or I was talking to a client the other day and they were saying that they were compared unfavorably against another family member who was always perfect. They were on this pedestal of they always got the right grades, they had the right clothes on, the best behavior, the best partner, all that type of jazz. And even though as an outsider for this person, they were looking at this perfect specimen, do you know what? The flip reverse of that poor child that was experiencing that critical parenting, as in everything's got to be perfect, will have grown up probably, and this is how trauma continues in a family line, will probably have grown up doing the same with their own children. So in other words, you have to be perfect as well, because this is the way I was brought up. And that's one of the benefits of doing our inner work, or doing deep change work and getting rid of trauma. So when I talk about trauma, so big trauma is the nasty stuff: abuse, losing a parent, going into prison, seeing physical violence, there being drugs, alcohol in the family. Those are all categorized as adverse childhood experiences. And as I say, big traumas. Then we've got the little everyday traumas, which are those moments maybe when we experience shame, we don't feel as good as other people. So going back to this example where this family member's been put on a pedestal, probably the person on the pedestal, they'll have experienced shame for not living up to parents' experiences, but also the person here who was perceiving the pedestal was experiencing shame because they weren't meeting up to some other family standard. And you hear it time and time again in families where the grandparent will favour one grandchild or a parent will favour one child. And in order to be perceived as more favourable, they might use perfection to elevate themselves. For example, it's all hypothetical, but it's all stuff that I've worked on with coaches in my coaching practice. And back to the family line thing. So what we tend to find is that a habit, a behavior is instilled in one person, and then when they become parents, they pass that on to the next in the family line, and so on and so forth. And I think that's where our job as parents, also as leaders, is one of the most important jobs, because we can, one, as leaders, demonstrate new behaviors and influence big amounts of people, but as parents, we are the custodians of that person's future beliefs and feelings about themselves. And so I think it's a really precious job. So dealing with our own traumas, whether it's a big trauma or a little trauma, either as a leader or as a parent, is great for humanity, society, our community. So back to, we were talking about childhood experiences that can cause perfection. So in terms of the origins, I've already mentioned it can often come from critical parent or critical carers. Here is a childhood example. So when I work with clients, often there are connections with making a mistake. So the number of times I have worked with clients who've made a mistake, either in a classroom environment or maybe they did something naughty as a child, which resulted in them getting told off, which was classed as a mistake. But one of the examples includes a leader I worked with many years ago, and for them, they didn't go for promotion because they were afraid of making a mistake in this new role, and they were afraid of failing by even applying for it. So they've been in one role for a long time. Anyway, when we tracked back to the childhood event, they were in a classroom and the teacher held up an owl pellet. And this is where the owl regurgitates the bones, the feathers, or do they eat birds? I don't know. But basically, the bits that they're not digesting, they regurgitate into a pellet. And the teacher held this up, and the student very bravely put their hand up in class and said, because they said, "What's this?" And she said, "Owl poo." Now, at that moment, the rest of the class broke out into laughter. And so that poor child felt they were being brave for a start. Whenever we put our hand up, why is it that we don't like talking in groups or presenting? It's because we're at risk of that shame and ridicule. So they'd put their hand up, the class had laughed. And from that day forward, so when we experience an intense negative event like that, we develop behavioral coping strategies, one of which can be perfectionism. If I am perfect, I am not going to be laughed, I'm not going to be judged, I'm not going to be criticized. But sometimes people hold on to that strategy so tightly that when they do make a mistake, they crumble. Hello, can you do me a favour? Would you mind either liking or subscribing wherever it is that you listen? So maybe that's on YouTube or Spotify or Apple, because that will help us to keep going and keep growing. The other thing that would be really helpful is if you could share it with someone that would also benefit from the content. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Right, let's get on. And I've worked with some people that have gone off with stress because they made a mistake, because they were no longer perfect. I worked with another individual, another childhood story, and the reason I'm sharing these childhood stories is so that in the hope that it provokes some thought in you. So maybe you reflect back on your stories, because if you know what those events were, then do you know what? You can haven them. You can get rid of them. You can take the power out. You can stop being triggered into perfectionism. And yeah, the other story was one particular person, really bright person, doing amazingly well in the career, made a mistake in the classroom by not following through a teacher's instruction. They misheard what the teacher said, and it was something really cute. But again, there was that public humiliation, class laughing, but there were also consequences because the teacher thought they were being naughty, so made them stand at the front of the class with their hands on their head. Of course, public humiliation, shame, any memories which have shame associated with them become either a big trauma or a little trauma. And the way that we get rid of those traumas is we use havening to break the neural pathway so it doesn't work anymore and we're not re-triggered. So anyway, that was their childhood example. Now, what this drives in people is black and white thinking. It's either right or it's wrong. And if it's wrong, if they've made a mistake, then, the world falls apart. But it's either black and it's white, or it's perfect or imperfect. But it's back down to, what's our definition of perfection? How do we know something's perfect? How do we know we've been a perfect partner, wife, friend, business person, leader? Where is that standard, I guess, is my question to you. The adult problems this causes, so in work, it's usually analysis paralysis. So fear of failure prevents us from taking action. In relationships, it's often fear of vulnerability and hiding mistakes. So not being our authentic selves, wearing a mask. In terms of the consequences of that, so the mental health issues it causes, high anxiety, self-criticism, and imposter syndrome. Now, I've mentioned on previous episodes, so I've designed a journal. It's not Adrian Mole, today I did, or Bridget Jones. It's not a record of your life. The journaling process is a self-coaching tool based on science. And the idea is that we change our critical dialogue, we think about what the problem is, we work it through to solution, and then we take action. So we don't get stuck in analysis paralysis, but also we become our own, I call it an inner captain or inner cheerleader, whatever you want to go for, but instead of succumbing to our inner critic. So back to the client example. For them, this owl pellet moment had stopped them from going for promotion. So not only had they not applied, but they'd missed out on opportunities because of this fear of failure. Anyway, long story short, they got to a position where they were able to be promoted because instead of getting stuck in that fear of failure, they were more relaxed about it and thought, what will be, will be. And I was just saying to my friend on the phone about TEDx. I get to find out hopefully on Friday. And I really am at peace with it. I've been really open about the fact that I'm on my 8th application. On average, it takes 30 applications, blah, blah, blah. It's been quite a lengthy process, 3 stages. I've managed to get to stage 3. It was like X Factor. But do you know what? I know I did my best. And I will openly tell you if I fail that audition. And I definitely wasn't perfect. But in the olden days, I would have hidden behind that mask and daren't tell anyone. So it's really worthwhile because do you know what? When you're not afraid of being yourself, and that's why my business is called Be, is about being yourself, it's so much easier. It's so much easier to be authentic, to not put energy into walking around with this mask, this perfect version of whoever you're meant to be. To just be able to be yourself is far easier. And don't get me wrong, again, I'm by no means perfect when it comes to being myself. Are there times that a mask will pop up? Yeah, of course there are. I'm just saying overall. Let's talk about the strategies now for overcoming the problems caused by perfectionism. So the mindset shift is adopting this growth mindset, which means embracing mistakes and learning. Back to TEDx. Do I know what I would do differently next time? Absolutely. Yes, I've got my action plan. So if I don't get through this time, next time I know what I do differently. And I like to use this process called, there's a little backstory. So can you remember Norman Wisdom? Used to love Norman Wisdom. And he was watching someone and the guy stood up to the microphone and he was stumbling over his words and Norman Wisdom's in the audience and he goes, have you forgotten the words? Sorry, it's not a very good Norman Wisdom impression. The words, just la it. And it's so true. So when we're at risk of making a mistake, think just la it. So LAR is an acronym and it stands for learn, act, review. This is exactly what I've been doing with podcasts. Not with podcasts, I have been doing with podcasts, with TEDx. I've learned how to do it. So I've read loads of books, I've been on courses, I've taken action, I've applied 8 times. I'm waiting for the results. And then I've reviewed. And then we go back to learning and taking action and reviewing until we get to the goal that it is that we're trying to achieve. So yeah, mindset, just LAR it, keep that in head. Tools, havening, I've already mentioned that. Get rid of the source, the root where this was caused. It'll be somewhere in your childhood. Break the neural pathway by using havening so that it doesn't recur. What else have I got here? Practice error-friendly experiments. So in other words, it's a little bit like on a previous podcast. So where if you don't get it right, it doesn't matter. So it's low risk. So deliberately, and I can remember practicing this when I was putting my slides together. So this was quite early on in my business. So it's about 20 years ago. And my husband had joined, so perhaps not. So about 17 years ago, my husband had joined my business because he'd been made redundant. And we were putting slides together and he had put his slides together and it was combining it with mine. And when I looked at his slides versus mine, his wasn't formatted the way I would have formatted it. And I got into a row with him. I was like, you've got some spelling mistakes on there and it's not the same font and you're representing my business and I was a right idiot. And that was when I realized I'd got a problem. So it's picking low risk examples or opportunities to not be perfect. So it might be, I don't know, going down the shops without your makeup on if it's a physical appearance thing, or it might be instead of preparing for an hour for a meeting, reduce it to half an hour. Or it might be if you're researching for something, instead of getting stuck in that analysis paralysis, set yourself a time limit. Right, I can do 30 minutes of research and then that's it. It might be if you're preparing for a presentation, being comfortable with if someone asks you a question and you don't know the answer and saying, but I'll get back to where that is. It might be if you make a mistake when you're making a presentation, to just collect your thoughts and move on, take a breath. So what? Although that does sound quite high stakes, doesn't it? So whatever works for you. What else? So boundaries. So it's working out. So the thing is with perfectionism, analysis, paralysis, takes time, takes extra time. It slows down our productivity. All that extra research, all that extra correcting, it's a waste of effort, isn't it? So work out how long it takes to do a task and then reduce the time you give yourself by 10%. And then look at your work and go, is that good enough? And if it is, let it go. Then stretch your comfort zone a little bit further. Excuse me, maybe not 20% of the time off. So you do it in even shorter period of time. And then see what happens. Is that good enough? So that you stretch your perfectionism comfort zone. Here's a micro action you can take. So publish or share a small, imperfect product document or learning from a mistake. So that was one of the ways in which I got comfortable with not being perfect is I'll just go, hey, I'll share with you all my mistakes. My positive purpose and intention is to help you to be even better so you don't make the mistakes I make. I've noticed, so on this publish something without making sure it's perfect, I've noticed that, what's it called? Diary of a CEO guy, Steve Bartlett. He does imperfect social media posts. So, for example, he'll do I with a little I. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Instead of a big I, a capital I, he does an I with a dot. Sorry, it's been a long afternoon. His posts are certainly not perfect. I was thinking, oh, that's interesting because there's a few errors in this. And I didn't think any of the less of him, but I did think about the strategy behind it. And I think the reason he did that is because there's so many AI perfect posts, aren't there, which takes the humanness out of them. So I thought, yeah, good on you. So that's an example of you could just type a post or type a message and don't spell check it, something like that. What else can you do? So the final thing you could do, so think about the resources you can read. Of course, there's Brené Brown, The Gifts of Imperfection, brilliant, love her stuff. My book covers imposter syndrome and perfectionism. OBS. You can listen to it for free. Series 3, I read out the whole book. I read it really imperfectly. It's hilarious. It's a bit like, I should be laughing. It's a bit like I'm reading out in class and I'm not the best reader. And the reason I'm laughing is that, so I track the statistics on my podcast and I look up to see what words it's I'm laughing, I'm sorry, it's really unprofessional. I look up to see what I'm being tracked for, and for weeks, I'm not kidding, because I'd published me reading out my book on the podcast, for weeks I was being tracked for reading improvement. That's so funny. So I don't know how the hell they probably thought I needed to improve my reading. So there you go. So a couple of books you can read. I've obviously mentioned my free journal. There's also my free workbook, which accompanies my book, which takes you through all the activities. And then, as I say, learn to speak to yourself in a less critical way. So counter that inner critic, because it's not your voice. That's the truth of it. It's come from somewhere else. And challenge it and change it into a cheerleader, basically. Yeah. So in my final episode in this mini series, bringing this one to a close, but the next, which is the final episode, we're going to be exploring the be strong pattern. Now, this is a really another interesting pattern. So the fear beneath the be strong pattern is showing vulnerability or needing help will make you weak or burdensome. It's a fear of dependence or being held back by others, which leads to stoicism and solitary coping. So this is another one of mine, to be honest. So anyway, that's what we'll dive into next time. All right, take care and see you next week. If you'd like to be notified when the next episode drops, remember to subscribe. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone who might benefit. Finally, if any of these topics have sparked your interest and you'd like to work with me, you can apply for a free discovery call at estellereed.com. Let's see if we're a good fit. You'll also find plenty of free resources there. I'm Estelle Reed, executive coach, speaker, and best-selling author, and this has been the Optimizing Your Brilliance podcast. Thanks for listening. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered professional advice. Please consult with a qualified professional for any specific advice related to your situation.